January 31st, 1993, Amarillo, Texas. A kitchen counter in a quiet home. A watch, a wedding ring, and carefully prepared sandwiches. A picture of perfect normalcy, suggesting the homeowner had just stepped out for a few minutes and would return shortly, but the owner of that counter never came back. Just one day later, exactly 1,600 miles away from this kitchen, he was found walking in the middle of Highway 24 in the freezing darkness of Washington state. He wasn't wearing the suit he wore in Texas, but military-style camouflage and heavy work boots. His name was David Glenn Lewis. His vehicle, his driver's license, his credit cards, and his entire past were locked away in Texas. How did he travel that massive distance, shedding his own identity without leaving a single trace? And more importantly, what was he running from on that highway that night? January 31st, 1993, Amarillo, Texas. A meticulously kept suburban home sits in deafening silence. On the polished kitchen counter, a man's wristwatch and a gleaming gold wedding band have been carefully removed and left behind. Inside the refrigerator, two freshly prepared turkey sandwiches sit tightly wrapped in plastic, waiting for a lunch that will never happen. In the adjacent living room, the VCR hums a mechanical rhythm, dutifully recording the Super Bowl broadcast for an empty couch. Every single detail in this house paints a picture of absolute undisturbed normalcy, a domestic still life suggesting the homeowner just stepped out for a breath of fresh air and will be walking back through the door at any second. But the owner of that watch, that ring, and that meticulously ordered life never came back. Just one day later, on a freezing February night, he was found walking down the center of an unlit, desolate highway in Washington state, exactly 1,600 miles away from his kitchen. He wasn't wearing the sharp tailored suits he was known for in Texas. Instead, he was dressed in rugged military-style camouflage and heavy-duty work boots. His name was David Glenn Lewis. His vehicle, his driver's license, his credit cards, and his entire known existence were locked securely away in Texas. How does a man completely stripped of his identity and his resources cross a massive continental void without leaving a single trace? And more importantly, what unseen terror was he running from on that pitch-black highway? Subscribe to the Raum Project to trace the lost files. To comprehend the sheer terrifying impossibility of this anomaly, we must first understand the architecture of David Glenn Lewis's life. At 39 years old, he was the furthest thing from a transient drifter. He was a highly respected attorney and a former judge in Moore County. He was a man deeply rooted in the rigid logic of the law, a pillar of his community known for his charitable work, and a devoted family man. The timeline of his complete erasure begins 4 days before his death on January 28, 1993. Lewis left his downtown law firm early that afternoon, telling his colleagues he felt ill and was heading home to rest. Around that same time, his wife, Karen, and their daughter were away on a weekend shopping trip to Dallas. When they returned home on the evening of January 31st, they walked into a frozen timeline. The house was empty. The laundry was washed, dried, and neatly folded. There were absolutely no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no missing luggage, and no packed clothes. It was an environment abandoned in the middle of a heartbeat. The mystery fractured into something much darker on February 2nd when Amarillo investigators located Lewis's red Ford Explorer. It wasn't found abandoned at an airport parking lot or a bus station. It was parked conspicuously right in front of the Potter County Courthouse in downtown Amarillo. The way the vehicle was left felt entirely deliberate, almost surgically staged. The keys were carefully hidden under the floor mat. Inside the locked car, investigators found his checkbook, his credit cards, and his driver's license sitting completely untouched. He had willingly or had been forced to strip himself of all financial mobility and legal identification. Karen Lewis informed the police that her husband had recently received threats and expressed a genuine paralyzing fear for his life, leading his family to firmly believe he had been targeted and abducted. However, the physical evidence soon introduced a phantom trail that defied all logic. Investigators discovered that 2 airline tickets had been purchased under Lewis's name, one flying from Dallas to Amarillo on January 31st and another flying from Los Angeles to Dallas on February 1st. Yet, despite these digital footprints, there was no concrete proof, no witness testimony, and no security footage to confirm he ever actually boarded those planes. The Amarillo police were chasing ghosts in the system, completely unaware that the definitive, tragic answer had already materialized 1,600 miles away. Subscribe to the Raum Project to trace the lost files. On the night of February 1st at approximately 10:30, motorists driving along a desolate, freezing stretch of State Route 24 just outside the small agricultural town of Moxie, Washington, encountered a bizarre and highly dangerous sight. A man was walking directly down the center lane of the dark highway, staring into the headlights. Before anyone could safely pull over to intervene, a speeding Chevrolet Camaro struck the man violently, throwing him across the asphalt, and then immediately fled into the night. When local authorities arrived, they found the victim dead at the scene. He carried absolutely no wallet, no keys, and no identification. Toxicology reports later confirmed there was no alcohol or illegal drugs in his system. He was completely sober. But the most baffling detail was his attire. The victim was dressed in rugged military-style camouflage pants, a heavy jacket, and thick work boots, an outfit completely alien to the refined wardrobe of a Texas judge. Because he carried no ID and his fingerprints matched no criminal records in the national database, he was classified as a John Doe. For 11 long years, David Glenn Lewis ceased to exist. He lay buried under an unnamed headstone in a Yakima County cemetery. The Texas investigation hit a permanent dead end, and the Washington hit-and-run grew completely cold. It wasn't until the year 2004 that this deafening silence was finally broken. Detective Pat Dieter of the Washington State Patrol, operating purely on a hunch after reading an article about cold cases, decided to take a chance on a relatively new investigative method, cross-referencing physical profiles on the internet. Dieter entered the height, weight, and basic physical descriptors of his John Doe into various missing persons databases. Eventually, he landed on the Texas Department of Public Safety website and stared at a photograph of David Glenn Lewis. The facial structure was an undeniable chilling match, but there was one glaring discrepancy. In the Texas photograph, Lewis was wearing a very distinctive pair of thick-rimmed eyeglasses, yet the Washington victim had no glasses on his face when he was found. Refusing to let the lead die, Dieter meticulously dug back into the sealed, dusty evidence boxes from 1993. Hidden deep within the pockets of the dead man's camouflage clothing were those exact same distinctive eyeglasses. Subsequent DNA testing using samples provided by Lewis's mother delivered a 99.9% confirmation. The anonymous man on the highway was indeed David Glenn Lewis. The identification closed the agonizing question of his whereabouts, but it violently ripped open the logic of the entire narrative. The family stated unequivocally that Lewis had never owned military camouflage or heavy work boots in his entire life. He was extremely nearsighted, yet he wasn't wearing his glasses while navigating a pitch-black highway at night. He had absolutely no known friends, business associates, or any logical earthly connection to the state of Washington. If he was kidnapped in Texas, why would his captors transport him seamlessly across the country, bypassing countless jurisdictions, only to release him alive on a random rural road? If he orchestrated his own disappearance, how did a man without his vehicle, his wallet, or his identity maneuver through commercial airports or across state lines entirely unnoticed, only to meet a random violent end in the Pacific Northwest? The David Glenn Lewis case remains a terrifying glitch in reality, a 1,600-mile void where human logic and physical evidence fail to intersect. It leaves behind nothing but the haunting image of a man stripped of his past, running from an invisible threat into the absolute dark. Subscribe to the Raum Project to trace the lost files.